some real parametric design work. I just set it to recording. Thank you for the reminder there, Julian. I would go like 30 minutes and then like go, oh crap, I forgot to record. Anyway, yeah, so this is being recorded, and I'll go ahead and post this on YouTube as soon as everything's uploaded after class today. In case you need to refresh your memory or you just miss hearing my Kermit the Frog voice or whatever it is. So anywho, back to what we're talking about. Yeah. So anyway, the course is going a little slow. Don't worry, we're going to pick the pace up in a nice way here soon. So you'll actually be doing stuff other than just sort of silly wall drawings. In fact, you're done doing silly wall drawings. Yay! All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and this is a chance for you to sit back, relax, ask some questions if you have them as it pops up. You can go like, "Wait, I didn't see what you did there." It's not like I expect you to be able to replicate what I'm doing on screen yet, but I just wanted to quickly talk through some of the things that I think will help you hit the ground running when it comes to making your own performative lattice. All right, so let me just open this up here. That would help. All right, so really quickly, Rhino's opened. I'm going to type in the command Grasshopper. There we are. Grasshopper should pop up as its own separate window on top of Rhino, right? Now, I'm sure some of you have figured this out, and others maybe find this a bit confusing at the moment, right? But when you save something in Rhino, it saves as a 3DM file. It's the Rhino native file format. When you're working in Grasshopper, you're really only saving the sort of graph, the mind map that you've drawn with all the little rubber bands connecting up to widgets. And when you save that inside of Grasshopper, you're saving that as a GH file. And so inside of Grasshopper, I can open up GH files, right? So here's the set that I gave you. A couple of new ones I just added, 86 3D and 130 or 118 3D. I'll just open up 86. Let's remind ourselves what that is. This is one of the pre-made ones based off of wall drawing number 86. I think it was like 10,000 lines, roughly 10 inches long, evenly distributed across the wall or something like that, right? I'm not sure what it was. Anyway, it's a bunch of straight lines, sort of randomly deployed, or I guess arbitrarily deployed across the wall. And so, one of the things that I think I want to talk about today is like, how would we turn that into sort of three-dimensional, a three-dimensional sort of thicket of 10,000 lines or whatever this is, okay? It's not actually 10,000. I think I have 1,535. And so I think one of the things we need to do is look at this graph and actually talk about what it's doing step by step, right? Just in plain English, right? Like just sort of, can we understand what the heck it's doing even, just by holding our cursor over the widgets and seeing the description of each of these tools and sort of following along to sort of understand at each step what's happening. Okay. Because at a certain point we draw lines, right? And that's what we get at the end here, these curves or lines. All right. So it looks like one of the first things I'm doing here is I'm setting a domain, which is basically just a minimum maximum. So I'm saying between 0 and 18, right? And so I'm setting up a mathematical domain that I'm plugging into a random number generator, okay? So this random number generator has several ingredients that it needs in order to spit out a list of arbitrary values. Okay? And the first one is the range, right? In other words, if I'm going to spit out values, I need to know what the minimum value can be and the maximum value can be, right? Okay, and so that's why I create a domain called 0 to 18, right? So in other words, I want to start drawing points within a 0 to 18 in X and 0 and 18 in Y. And so that's why I start there. Then as for the number of random numbers or values to generate, so I made a number slider. Right? I can generate more or less, make things more or less dense as I go. Right? I'm sure you guys, some of you noticed this when you were, if you open up this file and start playing around. And then there's something called a seed of the random engine generator, right? So the generational seed is something where you can also change. It's a number value but essentially changes the algorithm by which it generates a set of random numbers. And so if you need like a different list of random numbers out, you know, you can change the seed. Okay. And so as I change the seed, you start to see, you know, things change. All right. And so I've done that here, right? And then I use a widget called jitter, which randomly shuffles the random values. So I'm just trying to sort of really try to create a random set of numbers here. Not only have I generated a set of random numbers, but then I sort of randomly shuffle them around and sort of jumble them up to make sure that there's no real pattern to them. And I plug them in for an x coordinates to create a bunch of points. And I do the exact same thing down here, the exact same thing we just talked about, just with a different seed, right? So that way we don't have the exact same number spitting out. And then we jitter those, and then we plug them in for y coordinates. Okay. And so what happens then is I get a bunch of points out, right? What happens is I plug in a list of 3,000. Here, let me just change this to a nice round number, 5,000, right? So I plug in a list of 5,000 x coordinates and a list of 5,000 randomly generated y coordinates, and I leave z at 0. And what it does is it matches each of these up 1 to 1. So it takes the first value, the first x value matches up with the first y value and the only z value. And so the first point out is 0.002722 as an x, and 0.517358 as y, and 0 is the z. And it makes 5,000 points in that method. Okay, so it matches up all the lists 1 to 1. And then when it runs out of values, like say in the z list, it just keeps using the last known one. Okay. All right, we'll talk about data matching in the videos that you watch over the weekend when we start talking about matching up lists. And it'll actually be much easier, I think, to follow. But suffice to say, you know, this isn't so helpful to make one line, but it's really helpful when I make 5,000 random lines, right? All right, so I can do it in a series of widgets. To make this three-dimensional, what I'd probably need to do is add another sort of random seed engine and populate the z values, right? So that way, instead of, the reason why this is flat on the xy plane is because I'm only using one z value and it's 0, right? So everything falls within that xy plane where z equals 0, right? If I can start to populate the z values with a bunch of random numbers, then they'll pop up in the z direction as well, okay? And so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna take this, I'm just gonna very carefully copy. I'm not gonna copy the domain or the number of values, because that's all coming from, all of them are coming from the same slider, and I wanna keep that the way it is. But I do wanna be able to change the seed to something that I'm not using currently. So I'm using a seed of 2 and a seed of 7, and I'll use maybe a seed of 4. I'm just sort of picking that. And I'll plug this in for z. Right, now I'm getting, right, a three-dimensional sort of thicket here. All right. And last but not least, right, these are all falling in the XY plane. If you look at this in side view, it's kind of weird. They're all horizontal lines. And that's because not only am I placing points in space, but then I'm drawing a line from each of those points, right? So the way I'm actually drawing the lines is by using a start point. So each of these points that I generated in this 18 by 18 by 18 volume, and then I define a direction and then a length, right? So I give it a point and then I give it a vector, right? A magnitude and a length, okay? And so, or sorry, direction and magnitude, direction and length. And so in order to create that direction, I've done the same thing down here. I've populated and made a set of vectors, a set of points. And so I need to do this with the z as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this again. I'm gonna change the c to something again that I'm not using, like let's say 8, why not? Plug that in for z. Okay, and now I should be getting let's see here, 5,000, 5,000, 5,000. I get 5,000 vectors out. I jumble them up, and I plug them in here along with 5,000 start points. Yeah, okay, great. So I can make this more or less dense, right? Okay. So I would argue that, you know, looking through this, again, you wouldn't necessarily dream some of this stuff up, okay? But I did want you to sort of look and get used to going through these things and actually trying to read and follow what's happening. All right, so at this point, I just noticed there's a couple of questions in the group chat. What exactly is a random seed affecting? Why do they each have to be different? So for instance, that's a great question. Allison's asking that. The seed determines how things are generated randomly, just changes the random location. How do you copy items so they maintain their connections? Okay, so let's talk about the randomness first. This is just a widget and it connects random numbers. So if I use the same seed each time, I'm gonna get the same set of random numbers out. So here's what happens if I change the seeds all to the same thing. You'll see here, right? In fact, what happens is, let's see here. I'll just plug this in. Right? When I plug in a list of random numbers, I get a certain number out. So 13 point something, 14 point something. And if I use the same seed, I'll get the exact same numbers out for the next time. I don't want X and Y coordinates that are exactly the same, right? Which is what you're seeing here. X, Y, and Z coordinates are exactly the same. Things start to follow a diagonal. And so they don't look quite random, right? Okay. And then I jittered them, and I could actually change the seed for the jittering, right? The shuffling, if I wanted to as well. Okay. In fact, I have. This one is 9. This one's 2. I could always change, let's say, this one to 4, something like that. Right. The only thing that's keeping this thing from being totally aligned is that shuffling, actually. So I'm going to go ahead and change these seeds away, right? That way, now I'm creating a different set of values each time. So this one starts with 13 point something, 7 point something, right? Whereas the Y values are starting at 14, 13, 10. This one's starting at 15, 10, 17, right? It's just a way to generate a different list of random numbers, particularly when you start pairing things up for X, Y, and Z coordinates, which is really important if you want something to actually look truly random. Let's see, go to 5, maybe mix this up to 8. Seed values, let's see, that one's probably set to different. Okay, those are all set differently. Okay, great. Okay, so that was that one, Sol 86, Soloit, while drawing 86, where I just, you know, I was looking at what I was doing, generating lists of numbers, plugging them in for X, Y coordinates. Now I can also plug them in for Z coordinates. And then I start to get 3-dimensional arrays of points instead of just 2-dimensional arrays of points. Okay. Now another question: how do you copy the items so that they maintain the dimensions? How do you copy? Right. Whenever I'm copying and pasting, I'm using the keyboard. Control C, Control V. That's it. Okay. Always. Use that in Photoshop. Use that in Grasshopper, Rhino, anything else. If you are just copying and pasting, that's what I mean. Copy and paste. Control C, Control V. And then get used to, when your left hand is just not doing anything, to hitting Control S. Is there a backspace in Grasshopper? What does that mean, backspace? Like delete? Yeah. Are you using, yeah, I just hit the delete button when I, yeah. So let's see, where's my cursor at? Sorry, there we go. So I can select this and just hit delete or backspace. Depending on, and I just hit Control Z to undo, right? So depending on, like I have a Mac keyboard, so I actually have to hit Function delete, like because delete is the backspace on a Mac keyboard, like MacBook Pro. Yeah, their backspace. So copying, what I'm doing is I'm very carefully copying, like for instance, all of these things that I want to sort of copy and paste together. So I know I'm going to change the seed, but here's the thing, right? I look at all of these, they're all plugged into this for the quantity, right? And the reason I'm doing that is because if I change the quantity for one of these, I want to change them for all of them, right? If I have 5,000 X values, I want to have 5,000 Y values and 5,000 Z values and 5,000 shuffle values, okay? So that's why I'm leaving them all plugged into this one widget and all plugged into this one domain. But when I want to change the seeds, that's something else. Like whatever I select, I can hit copy and paste, and it'll keep things connected up, right, with whatever is existing, not necessarily onwards to the right, downstream, but upstream, it'll try to maintain those connections for you, okay? So that's all I did, was just be really careful about what I'm selecting to copy and then paste it in. Okay. There's separate jitter for the Z values. Yeah, exactly. I think I did that, no? Or did I not do that? Yeah, I mean, what am I doing? I'm jittering the points here. The shuffle or jitter. I don't remember what I'm doing. Yeah, there's probably a better way of doing this, but yeah. All right, good question, Richard. There's a backspace. Can you show a revolving view of the perspective view? Yes. Yeah, so let me just zoom in on that. I'm not sure why it didn't just zoom in. Huh. It's weird. Odd. Yeah. Right. So if you start to have seeds lining up, or you don't jitter shuffle things around, then sometimes you start to get some of those funky things where everything looks like it's on a diagonal plane or something like that. That usually means you have repetitive X or Y values or Z values somewhere, right? You're not, you don't actually have truly arbitrary values plugged in for each one. All right, so that's that one. I just wanted to quickly go through some of these things before we actually start to make some architecture today, okay? Look at this one, right? I think we all, let's see. A lot of you guys picked this one, right? The 118, right? If you look at the recipe, it's basically just, there's a widget that actually just makes a set of random two-dimensional points, right? Then what we do is we cross-reference each point against every other point, right? So that we can connect each one up with a line to every other one with a line, right? That's what this cross-reference does. So for this one, right, instead of worrying about our own separate X, Y, and Z coordinates, I could just go and find, what is this called? Populate, something like that? Populate 2D. So if I just type in populate, populate 3D, woohoo, ha ha ha. All right, so I could plug this in the same way. Right. Go ahead and delete this. You can see that by default, it's set a three-dimensional box, which looks pretty kind of dumb. I don't know, maybe it's like 4 by 4 by 1 or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on this region. I'm going to say set one box. Now I could actually manually snap and click and draw a box, just like I would if I was drawing like a solid, like a cube or something in Rhino. I'm just going to type in the command line 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Just type in the first point of the box, and I'll type in 18, 18, 0. And if you don't see where I'm going, then for the height, I'm going to type in 18, 18, 18. There. Now I've made an 18 by 18 by 18 cube, snap to the 0, 0 world coordinate point. So you can see now that I've generated a set of points inside this, which now I can just sort of connect them up again, and bam, now I have the sort of three-dimensional version. Yay. I'll go ahead and turn the preview off here, and you can see it, right? Like again, it's tumble around it three-dimensionally here. All right, so suffice to say, if you have a favorite sort of wall section, double click anywhere for the space button. Search function. Oh yeah, search function. You just double click anywhere in the canvas here in Grasshopper, and it brings it up. Yay! All right, or space button. Oh wow, I didn't even realize the space button does that. Holy moly! See, I learn something new every day. Wow. So, anywho, if you have a favorite one of these, you can always use these and start to modify them in here as the basis for your actual project one that we'll talk about more in depth. You've been sort of just learning about how to start to generate some of these things. We're talked about algorithmic thinking, and so anyway, what I'm going to do is show you now a sneak peek of what some of the stuff you'll be doing towards the end of the videos that you watch over the weekend. So we're going to make some trusses. Sound good? All right. You guys know what trusses are, right? hopefully. I mean, they're literally building houses like right behind my house right now. So, you know, feel I could always take the laptop and just show you like these trusses on these houses right now. But anyway, because the house right behind me is literally being framed right now, oddly enough. So let's see. I'm going to do a few quick things here. I'm going to get my annotate tools. I'm just going to draw something on the screen for you guys really quickly. We'll talk about where we're going here. And let's see, there we go. There's my annotate tools. Yay. All right, great. Undo. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to generate, first off, a bow truss, right? Oh gosh, that's downright terrible. All right, see if I can get better drawing on my mouse today, right? Okay, so a bow truss is shaped like a bow and arrow, right? And so what it does is it has a sort of round top and then a bottom chord that's straight. And then it has this sort of cross webbing inside here, right? Okay, and so I think one of the things that we'll do is we'll talk about this. I think this is a nice way to sort of talk about points, lines, and curves. Now that we've sort of wrapped our heads around wall drawings, right? So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to define a line for this bottom chord here. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to define 2 points in space, and we're going to draw a line that's the shortest distance between these 2 points. Okay. So we'll have a start point and an end point. Then what we're going to do is we're going to try to find a point somewhere along this line. We'll give it an address along this line and find, let's say it's midpoint. And then we'll use the Z vector and we'll draw a line upwards from there. And then we'll find that endpoint off in space. And so then we can use this start point and this endpoint and this endpoint. We can draw a nice spline to connect them in order to draw that top chord for the truss. So we have a bottom chord, and we'll use the bottom chord to generate the top chord. And we'll have some parameters here like height, right, that we can begin to adjust with sliders. We can also adjust the position, right, of where this point is along this curve, right, by adjusting the T parameter, right, the address. And then, so when we're done with that, then we'll have a top chord and a bottom chord. We'll divide these, both of these up, and populate them with a sort of set of points. Okay. The same number of points each, same number of divisions. And then what we'll do is we'll play connect the dots again. So we'll make a set of lines with start points and end points and make a series of vertical webbing, right, for the truss. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll find a way to make the diagonal bracing or webbing for the truss. Right, so we'll connect up alternating points. Okay. And we'll build a truss. All right, so this, in effect, is the most important part of what we're doing, right? Simply taking out your pencil and your sketchbook or a piece of paper and sketching out step by step your recipe, right? Your algorithm. Like, what do I want to do and what are the steps? The Grasshopper part's simple. You can pay somebody to do that for, in 10 seconds, okay? But the sort of recipe for what you want done, that's the important part. So thinking parametrically here is the real key here. We'll go ahead and clear that out. And let's go ahead and execute that recipe, okay? So first things first, right? I'm going to be working back and forth between Rhino and Grasshopper, okay? I'm going to define some geometry in Rhino. I'm going to bring it into Grasshopper so I can actually build off of it parametrically, okay? And then from there, as I start to do things in Grasshopper, you'll start to see everything show up in red, displayed and previewed in Rhino, okay? So you can go back and forth between Rhino and Grasshopper. In Rhino, I'm going to go ahead and create a point. I'll go ahead and create a second point. I'm just going to, very arbitrarily just set 2 points in space here. Okay. All right. Now, when I have some geometry that's already in Rhino and I want to bring it in and reference it in Grasshopper to use later on, there's a way to do that in the params tab in this geometry set, right? You can see that there's just about every single type of geometry classification that you can find here. Points, circles, lines, curves, planes, boxes, surfaces, meshes, B-reps, which is a fancy word for polysurfaces, et cetera, okay? So I'm gonna pick point, and what you'll see is this is kind of like a placeholder widget. I have 2 points I wanna bring in from Rhino into Grasshopper, so I'm gonna go ahead and Control-C, Control-V. I'm gonna have 2 points here, 2 point widgets. I'm gonna right-click on this one, and I'm gonna say Set 1 point, okay? And when I do that, again, you don't have to follow along if I don't want you to get lost. Grasshopper disappears, allowing me to actually select a point in Rhino, okay, that I want to reference in. Okay, so now you can see I've referenced this point that I've drawn in Rhino, and it's right here. I can use it. It will be important because that'll be my start point of a line. I'm going to plug that into a line widget later. Okay, same thing with this one. I'm going to go ahead and set 1 point by right-clicking. Grasshopper disappears until I select a point, and then it reappears. And now instead of orange widget saying it's empty and there's nothing, there's no input into it, now it's gray because it has one reference, locally defined value reference point from Rhino in, right? And if I change this, let's say I move that Rhino point that's referenced, the Grasshopper point that references it moves with it, okay? That's really important, okay? All right, so now I want to make a line. So I'm gonna go to the Curves tab, right? I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the set of lines are just a subset of all curves, right? In fact, a line is just a curve with 0 curvature parameter set, right? So if you think about parametric design, again, if you think about the geometry of curves, lines are just a subset of the larger set of curves, okay? But anyway, I digress. Curves, primitives, line. There's several different ways you can make lines. This one seems nice. Create a line between 2 points. So it just needs a start point and an end point. And fortunately, we just used those. I'll go ahead and connect those up. Now we have a line between these, okay? A line in Grasshopper. All right. Again, if I was to save this, if I save the Rhino file, all I'm saving are these 2 points because those are the only Rhino geometry here. And if I save the Grasshopper file, all I'm saving is basically this graph, okay? And I can open it up in any Rhino file and reference any 2 points and make a line. Now, it's kind of useless to make one line in Grasshopper, right? Okay, so let's build off of this further. All right. I just touched on this briefly the other day, and we'll actually talk more about this in the videos that you watch over the weekend. But I'm just going to go ahead and analyze this curve. What I want to do is I want to populate this curve with a point along its length somewhere. So I'm going to evaluate the curve at what I call a t parameter. Okay. You'll find that these constants, t, u, or the variables t, u, v, and w are commonly used in geometry and math to describe locations. In t, it's locations along one-dimensional geometry like curves and lines. U's and v's, two-dimensional geometries like surfaces, where you have a latitude and longitude point. And then UVW and three-dimensional volumes, right, in which you're trying to locate a point in space with three sort of coordinates. All right, so anywho, here we have the curve, here we have a t parameter. I'm gonna go ahead and reparameterize this. What that does is it normalizes the curve so that this line at the start will have 0, and at the end will be 1 at the sort of street address. And then I'll go ahead and put in a number slider here, punch that in for t. Now I can put a line anywhere along that curve, along its length. I'm gonna go ahead and place a point right at 0.5. I'll double click and just be really clear about that. All right. Great. Now what I need to do, I need to draw a vertical line from this point upwards at a certain length. And so I'm gonna go ahead back to my curves tab and look at other ways to make lines. And I don't have 2 points to connect up, right? But I do have 1 point, and I talked about drawing a vertical line, so I have a direction, and then that length or height for my truss, I want that to be a variable. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug this point in that we made for the start point. Direction by default is already set to Z, so that's handy. I'm gonna go ahead and just find the world Z vector and plug that in anyway, just to be clear. And then for length, I'll go ahead and make a new slider. I'm going to constrain this, reconstrain this. I'll make the maximum something larger, so we have a little more artistic license here to make something taller or not, or shorter. All right, there we go. All right. Now we have this line, but really all I want is this endpoint of the line. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and evaluate this curve. I'm going to go ahead and find its start points and endpoints. All right, so I'm going to plug that line in just to get its endpoint. All right, now we just need to connect the dots by connecting this point to this point to this point with a spline. And so I'm going to go to curves. I'm going to go to spline. I'm going to find interpolate curve. Okay, and there's a bunch of settings here, but really what I'm interested in are the vertices to connect, right? The sort of points to use to draw the spline. And so I'm going to use this point. Okay, then I'm going to hold down Shift button since I have to plug in multiple inputs to this one node. And I'll plug in this endpoint. So it's already connecting up that to that, right? And then I'll plug in this endpoint as well, holding down the Shift key in my keyboard. Now it's connecting the dots for us. 1, 2, 3 with this nice spline. Okay. All right. As a reminder, right, I can change the heights of this now. I can also change and make it asymmetrical if I need to by changing the location of my vertical point here. And then, of course, if I go back into Rhino and change the location of any of these points, right, then, right, those are originally the things that are referenced in. Everything will change with it. Not sure how I drew a line there. That's weird. Straight line, weird. All right, so here we have our top chord, right, for our truss. Here we have our bottom chord for our truss, right? And really, as I select each of these, you can see them sort of highlight in green, hopefully. Really quickly, I'm just going to turn off the grid. It's a little hard for you to see, maybe visually distracting, that's for sure. It's way too dense for my taste. All right, here we go. All right, so you can see the bow truss, right, as it goes. So let's see. What I say, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm going to divide each of these curves up. And populate with points in each of those divisions. And then again, now we'll have a set of start points and a new set of endpoints that we can begin to draw the webbing with, okay? So with a truss, we have the chords sort of top and bottom, and then we have the webbing in between that sort of adds, I'm not sure how many of you have had structures yet. If you haven't, boy, you're just getting a nice sneak peek of structures. All right, so let's see. Curve, division, and divide curve. There we go, that looks good. Divide a curve into equal length segments. Yeah, that sounds great. And I'm gonna put that down, and let's just take a look at this tool really quickly. First of all, I don't think this is be a complete surprise. It needs a curve to divide. That makes sense. And then the number of times to divide it. So how many segments do you want to divide the curve up into? All right. Split the segments at kinks. I'm just gonna, you leave that at false. I don't really want to worry about that. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this curve in. By default, the number of segments is set to 10. I'm going to go ahead and create a number slider and make that a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and constrain this one to integers by double-clicking on it. I'm going to change the minimum and maximum. It doesn't make sense to try to make 10.5 divisions. It's either going to divide this thing into 10 or 11 or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and constrain it to integers, a set of integers. I never want to divide anything by 0. The computer doesn't like that. So I'm going to go ahead and set the minimum to 1. Math just doesn't like that. And then maximum, I'll just set something up much larger, like 40. All right, go ahead and plug this in. 1 division, 2 divisions, 3 divisions, 4, and we'll just keep stepping that up. All right, in this case, I also need to divide this bottom line, right, the bottom chord, the same number of times. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this, just save you a little bit of time if instead of having to go through this, all the tabs again. Just go ahead and select and Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste another version of it. Really, all I need to do is change what's plugged in here for the curve to divide. I'll go ahead and plug in this line instead, right? So now I'm dividing this line and this top interpolated curve, right? The same number of times. I can move this slider around and see that. Okay. Now, a couple of things here. Visually distracting. I have this point, and I'm just going to go ahead and right-click that widget and turn the preview off so I don't see it. Same with this. Turn the preview off so I don't see it. And same with these start points and end points. Okay. At a certain point, all I'm doing is just turning off the preview. I won't see them in Rhino, even though they're still there. They're still calculated. They're still part of the recipe. But at this point, all I really want to see are the points that I'm trying to connect up. All right. And so what we said first was that, if I just bring up my annotate tools again, we're going to connect these one-to-one, right? So we're just going to make a set of lines. And what we have now is a set of start points and a set of end points, okay? And so that's where we're going to start. Let me go ahead and turn off my annotation tools. Say curve, a line between 2 points. Right now I'm going to plug in a list of start points and a list of end points, and I get a list of lines out. All right, there we go. So, and of course, you can change the density of these. You know, that would be a function of, let's say, span and the live loads and dead loads that we would anticipate being put on the roof, right? So, you know, in snowy places, you really have to watch for the dead loads. Snow can become really heavy. It's frozen water, you know. We don't have to worry about that so much here in the desert, do we? At least not at this elevation. I'm sure in Mount Charleston they do. All right, so, oh, right. So now what you need to do is we need to make the diagonals. This is where it gets kind of interesting. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at these lists, right? So what it's doing, when I plug in a list of start points, right? And you just see them here, right? Here are the X, Y, and Z coordinates for each of those points. Cool, huh? Right. And a list of these endpoints is just taking each one and it's matching them up and drawing a line between the first start point and this first endpoint, and the second start point and the second endpoint, right? And that's how we get 15 lines out, right? That's 15 start points and 15 endpoints, and it matches them up one-to-one, right? What I want to do is I want to match the first start point with the second endpoint, and the second start point with the third endpoint. And what that'll do is that'll start to match them up here, right? The first one with the second one, and the second one with the third one, the third one with the fourth one with the fifth one, and on and on. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing, but in the other direction. So the first one with the second one, and the second one with the third one, and the third one with the fourth one. And that'll create this sort of diagonal bracing, right? The sort of diagonal webbing. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the lists. There's sort of sets and then list tools. Here's all the sorts of things I can do with lists of things. And one of them is called shift list. What I can do is I can shift the list by one value. In other words, it takes the first value and shifts it back to the end of the list. And so I'm going to go ahead and rearrange these and make a new list of points where I've shifted them by one. Okay. I'll go ahead and do that here as well. All right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these up with lines. I'll go ahead and make 2 new line widgets. So I'll take the original set of start points with the shifted list of endpoints, and I'll take the shifted list of start points with the original set of endpoints. Now I get those. All right. There we have a truss. Now, again, I could have drawn this probably much quicker just by hand, right? Like, I mean, just literally, I could have just been like, Josh, I can snap to a midpoint and, you know. All right, so let's set up a situation where this might actually, like, the economy of scale might actually make this worthwhile. All right. Let's see here. I'll just draw something here. Let's say that we have the top edges of 2 walls, okay? And we need to generate a bunch of trusses all at once. All right, that sound better? But the interesting thing is that these aren't going to be identical trusses. And so, oh, that's weird. I wonder why my printer is starting to print really loudly. Odd. My kids must be printing. So I'm going to go ahead and top view and draw the top edge of two walls. Right, so if I wanted to populate these with, let's say, a set of trusses, and each one's going to be different, right? Then suddenly Grasshopper makes a lot of sense. Wow, the printer started printing. The doorbell just went off. All right, sorry. I hate working from home. This is terrible. This is like the worst. Anyway, all right. So Alex, don't worry for just a minute. We'll talk about. Yeah, I know, right? I know we're all in the same boat. Yeah. All right. I'll get to yours in just a minute, Alex. Let me finish this, and then we'll pipe these to give them some thickness. Right now, indeed, they are just curves, right? Just lines. So, all right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this recipe just a little bit. Actually, I'll just keep it over here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to select it all, copy, and paste. I'll just make a new version down here that I'm going to modify. All right. So if you remember, our ingredients, our beginning ingredients are 2 points, right? Between those 2 points, we draw a line for the shape of the truss. Then we start to build the top of the truss. Then we start to build the bottom of the truss. It's all based on those 2 points, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring these 2 curves that I drew in Rhino into Grasshopper. I'm going to go back to the params tab in geometry, just like where I did for these points. I'm going to do this for, let's say, curves. There we go, curve. Boom. I'm going to go ahead and reference these Rhino curves into Grasshopper so I can build off of them parametrically. I'll right click on this one and say set one curve. I'll go ahead and click this one. I'll also do the same thing here, set one curve and select this one. Excellent. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide each of these curves a certain number of times with points. And then I'll get a set of points that I can begin to plug in to make my trusses. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and divide these, divide curves. Divide this one as well. And now the number of divisions, I'll go ahead and make a slider. I'll constrain that to integers. Change the minimum to 1, the maximum to like 100 or something big like that. Plug these in. All right. Don't worry, you can get lots of practice with this over the weekend when you're following along with the videos, but I just wanted to sort of show you a sneak peek. Now, instead of a point and a point, I have a list of points and a list of points. What? Painters are here? Okay, okay, thanks. I'm gonna go ahead and plug these in. You're gonna see some things break, right? But we're gonna start building a bunch of trusses. Okay. All right, let's see here. Just gonna go ahead and move these. All right. All right, so you can see now we're drawing a line. Maybe you can see. Let me just turn these off so you can see a little easier. And we'll fix this step by step. Okay. There we are. That's a little easier to see. So first things first, what we did is we divided each of these lines. Now we have a set of lines, right? So we're gonna have a set of trusses that we're gonna build off of these lines, right? Let's see. Now we're gonna go ahead and sample a T parameter at each one. So let's do that, okay? So now we can sample the midpoints for each of these lines all at once. There we are. I'll move these over here. So we have the spacing between the trusses. Then we have the location along the bottom chord that we're going to set off for the top chord. We're going to go ahead and we'll still use the same Z value, and we'll use this as a length. So we'll go ahead and build these vertical, this outrigger, this standoff here. really all I want that standoff for is for that endpoint right here, right? So I'm just turning the previews back on. And now I have a list of endpoints and a list of start points and a list of endpoints. What I need to do is to have take the first value from this list and the first value from this list and the first value from this list and make its own sort of bow. In order to do that, I'm going to have to do some theatrics here. So I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect these for a moment before I do this. Turn the preview back on for that. Yeah. All right. You don't have to worry about this, but I'm just going to go ahead and fix this really quickly. And so I'm going to go ahead and use the graph tool. Let's see, from sets, trees. I'm going to make it something called a data tree. What that's going to do is it's going to allow us to sort of start to data match between various lists. And so it starts to match things up in the correct way, right? Let's see. I'll take these endpoints because I need those. And I need a couple for over here as well. Let's see here. I need these. No, let's see. Yeah, these points. And I need these points. Okay. So once again, let's see what I have here. Ah, yeah, they look good. I'll hold down the shift button and plug this one, and this one in. Ah, look at that. All right. And now, let's see here. What do I have here? I probably need to graft these. Let's see what I get. Yeah. Now let me just turn off all the redundant geometry, the construction geometry, right? Just brought back nightmares from second year probably, right? No, construction lines. Ugh. All right. Turn those off, turn those off, turn those off. Right. So now we have a set of trusses, right? And as you remember, the spacing is a parameter. The heights are parameters. The symmetry is something that can be adjusted, right? The density of the actual structural members can be adjusted as well. And like I said, this is just based off of the set of curves in Rhino. So if your walls change, let's say you're bringing in your Revit model into Rhino in order to create this sort of truss family, something here, and you change things and you bring it back in, right? These things will update accordingly. Fancy wires. Yeah, these are dashed lines. Yeah. So last but not least, why don't we give these things some thickness like Alex said. Right. What the dotted dashed lines mean, the dashed wires, the dashed rubber bands, that means that the data coming out and being plugged in is not just a simple list anymore, but it's actually a data tree. So we'll actually talk about that later on because it's really important, but it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. So you don't have to actually worry about this so much right now. We'll do some things the manual way with just some simple lists. Project 2, when we start talking about surfaces, we'll start talking about data trees. But suffice to say, if you think about a data tree, one way to think about it is sort of having a list of other lists. So you can actually have like 9 dimensions of lists embedded within each other and nested inside of each other when it comes to, like, let's say, scripting and with computers. So lists of lists of lists of lists. So it gets really complicated after a time being. But suffice to say, it's a nice way to mathematically or computationally sort of, how do I put this? Keep everything organized, right? But I'll have a couple, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, right? But I did want to show you guys this so that look, the eye on the prize is that we can start to generate lots and lots of stuff at the same time, right? And so again, that economy of scale kicks in. That becomes really interesting. Now, what could be really cool I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, oftentimes the performance of a truss has to do with how far it's spanning, right? I mean, just structurally, right? If I'm spanning, let's say, from here to here, you know, like I don't need something that's like my pencil will do that, right? But if I want to span, let's say, 50 feet across, right, then I need something that's a lot deeper. Does that make sense? So oftentimes the structural depth of something is dependent on how far it's spanning, like length of the span, right? Why don't we just build that in, should we? I mean, come on, makes sense, right? What we can do is we can take a look at the length of these lines. Let's go to curves. Let's analyze a curve. So we'll get the length. We'll look at the lengths of these. Okay. And then for the heights, let's make them a function of the length, right? So what we can do is maybe use just some simple math and say, look, the height of the structural depth is going to be, let's say, the length over 6. So we'll divide the length by 6. So I'll go ahead and plug in a number slider, constrain it to integers. I'll go all the way up to 8. Let's see, as a sort of factor of safety here. I'll plug in the length and divide it by this number, which I can change. And let's set that for the heights of the trusses. So now each height will be different, right? I don't know if you can see that in elevation, right? But the longer the span, the deeper the trusses get, right? Based off of some multiplier that a structural engineer would give us, right? So we would ask, you know, Professor Oakley or someone like that and say, hey, you know, like rule of thumb, you know, depth versus span, what can I do if I'm just want to start to get some ballpark numbers to start off with? Right? And then boom. Right? All right, so great. Look at that. Yay, happy little trusses. Now, back to Alex's question, right? We have a bunch of curves. There's a number of different ways we could think about this, but essentially, we want these, right, to give thickness to. These are the cross braces, right? And then we also want to give thickness to the top, the top chords and the bottom chords, right? All right, so let's go back to surface tools and let's see what we can do. An easy way to do this that I'm going to actually advise you to think about for now, if you want to give these things thickness, is maybe just do a simple piping where you just, let's say these were all out of round bar stock steel or something, or not bar stock, but round stock steel or something, in which case everything's welded together. So I'll just use piping, right, for right now. What that lets me do is it lets me populate or sort of plug in a bunch of curves and plug in a radius, and then it gives me the pipes out. And of course, I can also specify what kind of end conditions I need for the pipes. So let's go ahead and do that for the webbing here. Go ahead and hold shift down. Looks like our radius is way too small, or way too large, actually. So go ahead and make a slider for our radius. Adjust that down. Still way too large. Let's see here. I'll zoom in. There, that's better. And now I'm going to use a pipe widget for the top and bottom chords, which sometimes are usually a little larger than the webbing, the cross webbing. Let's see. So what did I do? Oh, pipe. There we go. Yeah, that would help if I remember what I was up to. Yeah. Okay, so back to this. I'll plug in those, and I'll plug in these. And I'll make a new number slider that I'll just use for these. But I'll beef these up a little bigger. Now we have some trusses. Yay. Boop, boop. Again, the radius could actually be dependent on any number of things, right? Like, you know, maybe the top needs to be beefier, or the bottom is in compression and tension, or maybe it has to also have a relationship with the span, right? So, you know, there's a number of different ways you could begin to build in the sort of complex relationships to make these things really, truly a smart model, so that, you know, as I begin to change everything here, right? really everything updates in a performative way, right? Oh, all right. And honestly, we're one step away from sort of analyzing the structural stuff and then pumping that data back into the parameters at the beginning so that it could actually optimize the spacing for us based off of, let's say, um, uh, off of some sort of performance criteria scenario. They connect multiple things at once. Sorry, I'm not quite following you. The rubber bands. The rubber bands, like when they're dashed, that just means that the data coming out is actually arrayed in a different way. It's called a data tree. You can see my cursor over, let's say, the C, the curves. And instead of saying like, here's a curve and here's a curve and here's a curve, what it does is it says there's 69 values, but they're actually broken up into several tree branches. So there's a list. There's 69 lists, one item in each list. Would you know how demanding it is on the computer to do this? Want to know if I can run this on my laptop or if I do it on my desktop? It starts to get pretty demanding at certain times, right? In this case, because of using data trees, it's not too bad. But oftentimes, if you don't have the right data trees plugged in the right places, then some things start to multiply exponentially, and then it'll crash on you. So I recommend saving before you start to do anything that potentially sets your computer onto an irretrievable loop of mess. Okay. So you know it all goes back here, right? If I set this count to 3, there's not that much, right? But as soon as I count my set to 60, right? Then if you think about there's a 60, then there's lots of curves, there's lots of points, and everything else in between. Right? All right. So I just wanted to quickly just sort of show you what's coming, because if I go here, right, we'll start with boxes, the videos that you watch, and you'll start to make lists of numbers. You'll start to plug those in to make points. You'll start to make grids of points. You'll learn more about cross-reference. Then you'll start to populate curves with points, right? And you'll learn more about the sort of what's happening geometrically with curves as you start to use them. Then we'll start talking about lists and how we can reorder them. We just use shift list, but this will talk in more detail about what that means, as well as reordering the list. We can reverse lists. We can pull a particular item from a list out. You'll go through this process step by step with more explanation about how to build a truss, right? Then you'll actually do one, and you'll actually upload a couple of screenshots where you change an input and then take a snapshot of what you've done and upload it. And then we'll build a 3-dimensional space frame truss, right? Using the similar recipe, but then building off of that. Okay. All right, so that's where we're going with this for the weekend. And you have a long weekend, so we don't even meet back. It's Labor Day weekend, so at some point I expect you guys to be able to watch these videos and follow along then. How would you recommend on trying to understand what each command? There's so many commands, it's hard to keep up. Yeah, so just what I'm curious about, and that's why I drew, right? I don't need you to know all the commands here, right? But I did want you to understand what we were sketching and sort of be able to follow the algorithm, right? In other words, here's the recipe. Geometrically, here's what we're trying to do, right? You'll only learn this from practice, okay? Sorry, I was reading another question and I got lost train of thought here. But really, you learn all the ins and outs from practice and on ad needed basis. So I don't need you to know what each of these tools do. There's too many of them to care about, right? But after a while, you'll start to understand geometrically what's going on. And then you start to understand some of the tools at your disposal, but you understand also how to figure out to find things, right? Like what's actually included in the surface tools, or I want to do this. Okay, I want to make a surface. Now I know to go to the surface tab and look around, right? I'm dealing with XYZ. I need to go to the vectors tab to look for what I need. Okay, so there's no quiz on what each of these do, because that's so counterproductive, right? What we're gonna do now is actually start to build space frame lattice truss. And so you're going to start simple by following instructions, and you're going to start to apply these on your own and make your own stuff. And by that practice, you'll start to pick things up, okay? And then in project 2, we'll do the same thing, but we'll start talking about surface, and then we'll start to actually add component systems along surfaces, and then actually laser cuts. And so you'll see, okay? Don't worry about, like, again, my whole point was that you'll never dream up like knowing that you need this widget or this widget or this widget, right? That's not the point yet. But I did want you guys to understand, the sort of basic geometric recipe. And then this idea that if I go through and, you know, I made one truss and you're like, so big deal, I could have drawn that. I could have modeled that pretty quickly, actually, without Grasshopper. You know, then the question is, how do I make 50 when they're all different, you know, and do that like this, right? So to me, that's what I just wanted to show you, to sort of whet your appetite for what's to come. The sort of repetition and difference is what I think computational tools allow us to really manage in a way that just seems really impractical with a pen and pencil, right? And so to me, it's sort of understanding the advantages that are afforded to you by digital technologies, you know, Grasshopper and Revit in particular, when it comes to sort of managing complexity, okay? Yeah, so essentially, I actually give you the instructions in the videos for when it comes time for you to actually snapshot and upload some things. The videos 11 and 14 actually have some specific instructions for you to do. So as you're following along, then it'll also tell you, okay, go here, take a screen capture, save it as a JPEG, upload it. You know, I need 3 versions or whatever. Okay, right. The links are already set in Canvas for you as well. Each of these have example files, so that the files, the graphs that I was using, you can actually find all of those example files. So if you have a hard time following along and you want to open those up as well. But I do really want for you, when it comes to building the trusses, to try to start from scratch and try to do it on your own. You can always open up those reference files and check it out to see if you're missing something or if you get stuck, okay? They're for your benefit. But at the same time, I want you to sort of go through the motions to try to follow along then after you've watched the videos once, right? So you go to, you know, building the truss and you watch this again and you follow along. Watch this one again and follow along, and then you're done, okay? There's more videos to watch. You don't have to do all of these, but you can always open them up and look at them yourself, okay? But you need to start at 01. It tries to explain things a little better and more thoroughly than what I've done here. I'm just trying to whet your appetite, try to get you excited about this stuff. So you're not looking at these videos and going, what the crap is this for me? I don't know. All right. If you have any questions, just email me. It's a long weekend. I'll be checking my email, you know. I'm sort of tethered to my phone like that. So, all right. And with that, I think we're done. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'll stop recording.